Great. Well, thank you everybody so much for being here. We're really excited to have you here to talk about innovation. And so accelerating climate innovation on the road to net zero is our title today. But really looking forward to this being a discussion. So we'll have a lot of really creativity as a start, some data interspersed, and then a fantastic panel as well. But then hoping to save some time for some Q&A. So save your questions and kind of put up some good questions for discussion later. And so wanted to first make good on that promise for creativity as a start. So I'll hand over to Liv, who will introduce Chris and all the incredible work that they're doing with the Hot Poets work to kick us off.
Hi, everybody. My name's Liv Talk. I'm a hot poet, obviously. I'm a... that joke never, I know, right? Don't let the laughter extend too long. This is my fellow hot poet, Chris. We are here at COP28, bringing to life the UNFCCC's Resilience Frontiers Pathways to a Better Future. We're exploring all these wonderful, innovative projects. We're working with scientists. We're bringing those incredible sort of future-thinking philosophies and practicalities to life through poetry. Hot Poets is a bridge between the science and the arts. We're here to make the complex accessible. And what better person to do that than my fellow director of Hot Poets, Chris Redmond, who was commissioned to write a poem for 3M based around their creative innovation. And he's going to share that with you now. Can you give him a round of applause? Because poets need that. That is scientifically proven.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I had the pleasure and privilege of speaking with 3 scientists from 3M and asking about their work and exploring the intersection between science and art and creativity. And this is what I wrote. Blink once for 20 years. Click 3 times. Do you see it? A future. What color's yours? This is an exercise in learning how to see with our eyes closed. It's how every book is written. How a child springs from birth to roller skating backwards, listening to Aretha Franklin. We made electric lights and computers in our palms. We learned to navigate oceans by staring at stars. We've got game in the unknown. Here, we drink clean water. Air is pure. And I've forgotten the next line. I can't tell you how many times I've done this poem in my head. But this is how it goes, and I'm okay with that, because I've had about 3 hours sleep in the last 3 days. Air is pure. Earth has been handed back to itself. Great apologies have been made and accepted. Forests and cities sing in symbiosis, harmonizing the clang and funk of species that once teetered on edges. You can get an electric bus anywhere. You can recharge your AI assistant whilst growing your own broccoli, know your own footprints, and how to balance the steps we take, how and where to balance the marks you make, how to take in exchange. We build in circles. Waste is a dirty word. Profit comes in many measurements. We are no longer frogs, slowly boiling ourselves. Anyone can paint a picture if they close their eyes. But how do we get here? Today, I asked 3 scientists. Jay Shree says we need better stories with different ideas of what science can be. PhD in chemical engineering, Hall of Famer, smart mischief in her eyes. Grew up in northern India in a family of engineers, swapped their question of how does this work for her own. How can I help? 30 years and 80 patents later, she's still asking. Jens explains to me the meaning of Spazierendenken, a German phrase for thinking while walking. How the best ideas arrive in nature. How the default mode network is the brain's screensaver. Innovations, keys, cracked codes flicker to light when we sit under apple trees. He's leading on the green hydrogen economy. His Zoom background is a pen-drawn light bulb. In Minnesota, Corey is all gym arms and t-shirt and lab goggles. He read the IPCC report with fellow scientists and asked, what do we need? He tells me how he and his team have built filters that extract CO2 from air, and every method of capturing it and containing it is a sped-up version of what nature does. What is the collective noun for scientists who care? A question? An inquiry? A collaboration? I know none of these are nouns. Sometimes you have to think outside. Innovation doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't conform. It challenges us to create, to transform, chanting change songs, painting visions of safety in every color of every alphabet whilst harnessing hydrogen to green steel. Electric car batteries humming circular symphonies, turbines like great kinetic dandelion sculptures, smart energy grids responding to our every step. This is the biggest work of art we've ever made. And it's going to take all of us. The responsibility to lead the change lies with those who are willing to change how we lead, how we pose a question. Blink. Do you see it? Thanks. Thank you.
Of communication as well, right? So thank you so much for that little creativity burst to kick us off. So hi, my name is Rachel Jetel. I am co-director of Systems Change Lab at World Resources Institute. We're a think, do tank, if you like. And I've got some fun data for you as a kickstart and scene setter for today's discussion on innovation. And really excited, I'm going to drop this, I'm going to put it over here. Really excited to just also say, my goodness, we live in a complex world. We're here talking about climate. It is a climate conference. But really, frankly, in the first few days, we've been talking about all of these systems, all of these things that are absolutely interconnected. The way that Systems Change Lab looks at it is climate, nature, equity. You cannot solve one without absolutely including those other two as well. And so there's so many ways to slice the world, if you like, and we look at these 15 systems or transformations that need to occur. So that little link that you might be able to see at the bottom is basically the 70 some odd shifts or transformations across these 15 that will add up to the systems level change that we need to solve for climate, nature, equity. So 1.5 trajectory, halting biodiversity loss, and building those equitable futures for all, right? That inclusive nature of what that transition needs to look like. And so the idea really being that, the complexity, the dynamicism of our systems that we're all operating in are absolutely vitally important for us to keep in mind so that we're not creating whole new monsters. So we're actually, creating that transformative change that we're after. And to actually make that really tangible, Systems Change Lab looks at this in a State of Climate Action report every year. You might have heard of it. It's 200 some pages long, so I recommend picking up an executive summary and just having some fun with a modular approach to the report. I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste, but basically it's the biggest roadmap of our gap in climate action, but also, of course, where we're also seeing the bright spots. So we often talk about this as like a duality of reality, right? So we're seeing true bright spots and actually some pockets of exponential change starting to take off. Meanwhile, we're off track. So just as all of you know, this is probably tattooed on the back of your eyeballs by now in terms of the footprint and where it all lives, focusing in on that climate aspect. So many of the sectors that we look at are 80% of the footprint of the world. And I'll fly by this pretty quickly because this is the punchline. So if we're going to color code, across 42 indicators of power, transport, buildings, industry, food and ag, technological carbon removal, finance, this is our kind of state of play. One green indicator. Yay, that's new. So EV is really taking off that exponential curve now. All the innovation in battery technologies and storage really enabling that and letting the market forces come in to do that. So one green, incredible bright spot. Actually, bright spots in some of the yellow as well, right? So of course the renewables stories around the world are incredible. And really taking off, not only in developed world, but also developing country exciting stories. everything from Namibia, Uruguay, outpacing the level of the rate of change in a 5-year period that the global rate of change needs to be, as a quick little story of a snippet of a bright spot. And then there are the oranges and the reds, which basically means, the yellow is basically we need an acceleration factor of 1 to 2 in terms of the rate of change. Orange meaning we need to double or more the pace of change. Some of those are even tenfold. So we need a 10x acceleration in some of the indicators that we look at. Public financing for fossil fuels, totally heading in the wrong direction. It's one of those red indicators there. That's a really unfortunate piece of news from the last year, and a really vital one for us to all continue to bring to this particular COP and to help make that in the right direction again and have it decline. And then the purple set, meaning we don't have sufficient data or sufficient historical data to actually give you that same analysis over the last few I just mentioned. So this is kind of basically this quick state of play. And this is my favorite slide to help give a few highlights of what those acceleration factors look like. So, the idea being that we need deforestation to continue to fall 4 times faster. Again, we're seeing incredible bright spots, right? So with Lula, in the first 6 months, seeing 30% percentage of that lessening. So we know that we can take the action. We know that there are innovative approaches, for example, in transport, right? So that green indicator, but it's not just EVs. We need other modes of transport. We need to absolutely think about the whole system of mobility. So in that, it is thinking about the 6 times acceleration rate we need for expansion of public transportation infrastructure. Coal needs to phase down, 7 times faster, and so on and so forth. So these kinds of things to help really make the translation of what IPC is telling us, the latest science, into key sector by sector indicators and measures of progress is really what the Systems Change Lab is after with the State of Climate Action Report. And really, this is my last slide before I bring up the panel, but to help tee us off, because we'll actually use this as a bit of a theme for some of the questions. Is really thinking about, yes, what I just showed you are all outcome level indicators, outcome level targets. So, setting for ourselves the 2030, 2040, 2050 benchmarks, where we are today, hence the acceleration factors we need to reach. However, the enablers and the barriers are also vitally important to be tracking as well. So just to loop around this really quickly, we are here talking about this one about innovation. But it's innovation in technologies and also practices and approaches, ways of working, right? So we'll get into a lot of those fun themes here today. It's also leadership from change agents. You all are leaders of change, you're all change agents and leaders in your own right, taking kind of courageous leadership in various ways. Regulations and incentives, so we need an enabling policy environment to enable the pace and the scale. This is a word that we were talking about just before the session started. And then strong institutions. We need governance, we need structure to actually enable, the architecture, if you will, to enable the change to actually happen. And behavior change and social norms. Ooh, that's a tricky one. But the nudges and the really important kind of incentives to help us there too. So we'll go around kind of these wheels that are all interlocked together to enable the change, particularly focusing on innovation. So I'll invite our panelists to come and join us up on stage, please. So let's see. Gayle, would you like to come up? So Dr. Gayle Schueller, SVP and CSO for 3M. So excited to have you. Jim, would you like to join us? Jim Coulter, our TPG Executive Chairman and Managing Partner for TPG Rise. Santosh, would you like to come up? Santosh Kumar Singh, CSO of Adani Green Energy. And Johanna Scheel, would you like to come up? Policy Officer for DJ Climate for EU Commission. Fantastic. Great. So I think, in terms of innovation, I would love to start, Gayle and Santosh, with you. In the private sector, really, where do you start when there's so much to do? There's so many places to innovate. What does innovation look like for you, where you sit in your company, and how do you prioritize where to start?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. The way we look at is first of all, Adani Green is a pure play renewable energy company. We develop power projects connected to the grid based on purchase of agreement with suppliers, with different discoms. We look at the scale and speed that you talked about. Like we have done almost 8.5 gigawatt of grid-connected solar and wind in the last 8-9 years. And we have a portfolio of about 12 gigawatt under development. And we have ambition, or already the plans are in place for putting at least 45 gigawatt by 2030. So that's our first target. In addition, we are looking at having a complete hydrogen ecosystem, green hydrogen ecosystem of at least 1 million ton per year, backed by additional 20 gigawatt of renewable energy. So that's the scale we are talking about. And how we go about it is we move early in terms of identifying land, and then having a complete study on those land of the ecosystem, biodiversity, because we believe that green energy also has to be sustainable in the long run. So we work on water positivity, we work on zero waste, we work on single-use plastic-free system, and then we implement it across all our sites. As on today, we have 102 sites which are operational, and another 60 under development. And what we do basically is for decarbonization of the grid. Like in the last financial year, that was 22-23, we have avoided almost 13.5 million tons of CO2 emission by providing green energy to the grid. And that's more than emission of many small countries. And once we reach the target of 45 gigawatt, we believe that we will have almost 50% of the energy coming from the renewables. Thank you.
Perfect. That's really wonderful. And also 45 gigawatts by 2030. Whew. Right? I mean, my goodness. You know, your work is really cut out for you, and that whole idea of like, how to get there. Maybe I'll just ask you a quick follow-up question, Santosh. And I'm stealing this phrase actually from Gayle. You know, we're in the decisive decade, and we need to go from that ambition to that implementation, that kind of innovation, you know, to impact. So that whole story of how to achieve, you know, that incredible scale that you were just saying. Any kind of words of wisdom or what you're seeing in terms of turning that ambition into action in this key phase of implementation?
Yeah, you have to look at the country scenario. India has been very ambitious in having targets on renewable energy. The country has targeted a generation capacity of almost 500 gigawatt by 2030. And it's not only setting target, it's supporting and developing the entire ecosystem. Like initially, India imported almost all the solar panels and components. But now with production-linked incentive kind of thing, a lot of things are happening within the country. In fact, we have also participated in it, and we also started with completely imported panels. But we have now integrated the entire backward supply chain, which has helped not only in reducing the cost, but also mitigating the risk of supply chain disruptions, global supply chain disruption. So we have almost 5 gigawatt of solar module manufacturing, right from polysilicon to ingot wafer to cell and module. And now we are also developing a 5 gigawatt of wind turbine manufacturing facility, which will be operational within a year. And that's how we have been able to reduce the cost, because affordability of green energy is also a very concern in a country like India. And as we speak, our green energy tariff is less than 4 cents per kWh. So that's the kind of tariff we have already achieved. And we believe that with further development and investment in green hydrogen ecosystem, by 2027 or 28, we will be able to produce green hydrogen at less than $1 a kg. So that's what we have our internal targets.
Fantastic. Gayle, 3M, right? You are a heartland of innovation. Tell us what that means, what that looks like for you from where you sit, and yeah, that kind of question of where to start prioritizing, I should say.
So innovation at 3M, you know, you may think of Post-it notes, you may think of other things like that. We're actually a very important materials provider across renewable energy, across electrification of vehicles and transportation, so it's nice to see that moving forward, but also more broadly across the ways that we live on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things that we've brought forward is this concept of a sustainability value commitment, where every new product we launch, whether it's something that applies into the healthcare space or the electronics space or broad mainstream industrial or consumer, it must have an advantage based on what's available today from a sustainability perspective. We've looked at actually a number of different approaches that were very analytical, and we found that this inspiring and being specific to the market was really important for us. You couple that requirement of having a sustainability value commitment for every new product with our ability to work under a 15% culture, which means that any employee can have up to 15% of their time working on anything that they have a passion about, using the company's resources. And in doing so, what ends up happening is there's ideas like scouring sponges made out of otherwise waste agave fibers. You know, that's what happens when you make the tequila, you have leftover agave fibers. Coconut husks in India, et cetera. But it's also today where the vast majority of the Scotch-Brite solutions that we offer are made with 100% recycled content in the fibers. It's also the way that we have roofing granules that pull smog out of the air and reflect the effects of the solar rays to reduce the effect of urban heat islands. So those types of ways that we approach things, it's really taking things from that innovation, from that creativity of that 15% culture, and going beyond that to create solutions that really can scale for impact. And so every business can pick their own, but we have that overriding piece that guides as a company.
That's fantastic. I also, I love the 15% culture because it is like, basically, it's at least a nice portion of your time is for creativity. So Chris kicked us off with a gorgeous creative start. The idea of building that creativity in ultimately to enable the innovation that needs to happen. Yeah, I love that.
So it creates really surprising things like the reflective signage that you saw when you were driving through here, or even license plates. A lot of that comes from 15% culture. But then the same technology, we have 52 technology platforms. That same technology then gets applied to how you attach semiconductor devices onto printed circuit boards, or how you create dental amalgams in your mouth that have the look and the feel of natural teeth, but yet that composite structure cures at a temperature and an environment that's normal inside of our mouths. So there's a lot of creativity that come into play with those unexpected connections. And so we really like working with people across different boundaries and across different industries.
Fantastic. Jim, if I can come to you next. So innovation, and I would say that you also uniquely maybe sit with this too. You need to take on a bit of risk to really innovate and try something. And you might fail, and that's okay. You learn from that failure. Likewise, you might invest in something, and it may or may not be successful. Talk to us a little bit about how can companies, but other actors, I liked what Santosh was saying, right? We need a whole ecosystem approach. So how can, from where you sit, how can actors and companies feel incentivized and take on that risk and ultimately lead to the kind of scalable impact that we need via innovation?
It's sort of an interesting panel because what we see here is an ecosystem, and I want to come back to that word, ecosystem. We have government, we have a developing market, a scaling and amazing, we have an established company. I'm the money. So my job is to help innovate in how the financial system works to enable this to happen. Because right now, I'm actually not worried about the technological innovation that's going on. Just walk around this place. Extraordinary creativity and technology growing up in a way that I hadn't expected. We've met with 1,000 companies in the last 2 years that are offering climate solutions. But today it's actually moved to another set of innovation that's needed. It's systems innovation. And we somehow have to marry the technological innovation, the financial innovation, and what I'll call scaling innovation. And sometimes they say it takes a village. This takes an ecosystem. So let me give you just a couple of observations. Walking around here, what gives me hope is we're seeing the creation of an ecosystem. No one of us can solve this issue. All of the parts of what you see at COP need to come together to actually move us forward. And that ecosystem is, I think, about to enter my second point, which I'll call a smartphone moment. As you pointed out, there is no silver bullet. You showed a lot of squares with a lot of red. We don't need a silver bullet. We need silver buckshot. We have to hit all of those. But in some ways, I think we're wrong to put out like it has to be 7 times. It makes it so hard to take a step forward. What I'm seeing, in fact, is that a series of things are lining up, and technology never moves in a straight line. So what do I mean by a smartphone moment? In 2007, there was a moment in time where a series of inventions that had come together, whether it was GPS or touchscreens or GUI interfaces or Wi-Fi, all of a sudden were available. And everything changed because they came together in a way that we could create a whole new system of communication and information. So my hope is, as I sit at this, we see government stepping forward. We see businesses stepping forward. We see technology stepping forward. And those things together can create a moment which can leapfrog some of those reds into yellows and greens. And that's beginning to happen. And I think this COP will hopefully be the moment that we stop getting overly rotated on the why and what, because we should all know the why and what, and we move into the how. And that's where I find hope.
That's fantastic. Now you're making me regret one slide that I cut, which was a beautiful exponential S curve over and over and over again for a few of the things that we're starting to see. Number of green steel launch announcements, right? Heat pumps, EVs, right? So we're starting to see it. We so often think so linearly, like, and then the whole idea being that actually change doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's hard work. Deforestation might be more on, but the idea that actually is particularly social, technological changes can really follow that S-curve shape.
Yeah, let me just jump in on that for a minute. One of the things we need to challenge ourselves on the climate world is to make sure we don't fall victim to the triumph of pessimism. So I live in an investment world in Silicon Valley where for many years I would go to tech conferences. And just as an observation, tech conferences are like almost silly optimistic. Like we're going to solve all problems tomorrow. We're going to have self-driving cars on Thursday. AI is going to solve all of our issues by Friday. And when at climate conferences, we're not going to make progress by 2050. Well, if we don't start making progress today, we won't make progress by 2050. But if we begin to look 5 days ahead and 5 months ahead and 5 years ahead, then we can begin to see a progress, see the path to 5 decades ahead. And as I look, the closer I get, the more optimism I see. And so just kind of grabbing that optimism as a way to address the problems as opposed to letting the worry of, boy, 7 times seems a lot. Well, let's go 1 time faster and 2 times faster, and then we'll get to 7 times faster. And that triumph of optimism and action over pessimism is something that I hope we can find. The clarion calls of having to take action have been heard. And so now, like, the how is something that I'm deeply embedded in.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We call that like basically a reflexive future. So you put it out and you manifest it, don't you? So you manifest it into being. So yeah, if we're only putting out the kind of pessimistic future, that's what we're gonna manifest. But like that whole idea of that duality being understanding I would argue the evidence-based scale at which we need to achieve, which science is telling us. But yet, absolutely have to couple that with the optimism to enable it to happen. Yeah. Johanna, I'm going to come to you next. So government, tell us more about the policy's role in this incredible ecosystem. I hear you're doing really cool things in the EU Commission. Would love to hear more about how you're enabling innovation from where you sit.
Much. Thanks also for the invitation. So I work for the EU Commission for DG Klima. For those that are not from the EU, DG Klima is the ministry, so to say, that runs the European emissions trading system. So our main task is to make sure that there's a functioning carbon price in Europe, and that the cap, it's a cap and trade system, that the cap is going down to 0 or below in 2050. And I think that's the most important building block of the innovation ecosystem in Europe, because by having a carbon price, you really create a business model and a business case for many of these innovations and technologies. Because ultimately, climate is a problem. As much as I love the financial sector and I work for a clean tech fund, it's not a problem that the market is going to solve, because it's an externality problem, right? It's something where pollution is free and innovation is not. And it's very hard to compete with business cases against the ultimate business case of drilling a hole in the ground and money is coming out. So I think the carbon price is really the first building block of innovation. So what we do in the European Union on top of the carbon price is we try to identify where the current carbon price is still not enough in order to incentivize investment. And I think for renewables, for coal to gas switch, for gas to renewables switch in the power sector, that has worked really well just with the carbon price. When we start hitting the barriers for 2030, 2040, 2050 targets, so steel, chemicals, refineries, long duration storage, that's where the current carbon price of 80, 90 euros per ton is not enough to incentivize investments. And even investors who have a slightly lower return expectation in return for green investments, they will not make these investments in many cases. So for these areas, we have established several funds that are funded from the European emissions trading system. So we take the money from the worst polluters and we give it to the most innovative companies, the best performers in terms of getting to net zero. And there's 3 main funds I want to highlight. One is the Just Transition Fund, which is really targeted at not leaving people behind, getting political buy-in for the transition to net zero, making sure that we do no regret options like implementing energy efficiency measures, district heating, etc. Then we have the Modernization Fund, which is targeted at mostly Eastern European countries who don't have the fiscal space, who deploy some of the already commercially established but not quite normal market returns type of technologies. And then the last one, which I'm most excited about, is the EU Innovation Fund, which is targeted at very hard to abate sectors, and they're at solutions that really, at the moment, private financing is not really touching with a barge pole because it's too risky, it's too expensive, it's all capex and hard tech. It's not a sexy digital startup where you can get exponential returns after a couple of years. So that's what the Innovation Fund is focusing on, and I think there we have a couple of really cool project examples.
I was just going to ask you, any chance you could tell us a couple of examples of the Innovation Fund?
Yeah, totally. So one steel was mentioned before. So the first green steel plant that's actually running and producing in the world was funded with the Innovation Fund. It's located in Sweden. We have a new project which is producing anodes for batteries from lignine materials. So rather than graphiteous materials where we rely on a supply chain that is partially difficult at the moment, we can skip the graphite part and produce anodes with lignine. And we have this company to go from a pilot plant to a 3 gigawatts per year production facility, which is covering roughly 15% of European demand. And this type of de-risking and taking a leap or jumping one stage, that's exactly what we want to do with the Innovation Fund.
Yeah, fantastic. One other quick follow-up question would be cross-pollination. Like, I wonder, any of the examples, we have a whole series of folks sitting on the panel from all over the world. Is there kind of a two-way cross-pollination of what you're finding is working to help inform some of the funds, or likewise, are you sharing what's working and what's not as well, back out to others?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a clear mandate for knowledge sharing. So the idea is here, Europe or the US or countries with a lot of fiscal space, they can afford to invest in innovation, but we have to make sure that technologies are deployed everywhere. So it's a fine line between commercially sensitive information and sharing technology best practices, for example, through the IEA or IRENA or other international fora. But for other projects that we fund, we have very strict reporting requirements in terms of best practices. And we also don't limit our funding to European companies. So companies from all over the world can be funded through the fund. However, the CapEx investment has to be in Europe.
Fantastic. That's great. Actually, maybe I'll just stick on that cross-pollination question or theme really quickly. Any other when we're thinking about, cross-pollinating the kind of creativity, the innovation, Gayle, that you were talking about before, Santosh, the same kind of idea, like how is that maybe two-way taking in and kind of sharing back out what's working and frankly what's also not? Any reflections on that?
I was really trying to not interrupt earlier because I was loving Jim's comments about, how you get those nuggets, you get those breakthroughs. And that's actually one of the things that I think is most important about COP and most important about bringing people together at COP is that we each have our own innovations that are happening. And sometimes we even take them for granted a little bit. And it's when we start bringing together, and I think this is what happens with the S-curve. I remember being in Silicon Valley, when you could see the pieces coming together. One of the ones I had trouble with is I couldn't envision how we could have glass be the front of the cell phones. But the Gorilla Glass that's come forward right now is phenomenal, and we don't break our phones every time they fall on the ground. Those types of not every time, but those types of breakthroughs coming together, knowing what the issues are, seeing how all the puzzle pieces fit together and what remaining gaps there are, that's when you can really get those S-curves to accelerate nicely. And what I feel like we see with that and what we have the opportunity with COP is those pieces coming together. So I loved your slides at the beginning, Rachel, about how, we're on track with EVs. Been working a lot on EVs for a long time. There have been a lot of pieces coming together. But now what about renewable energy? Boy, that looked like that was ahead of EVs for a while. Now how do we get it there? Because that's the necessary next step to really electrify both vehicles and industry more broadly and so many other areas. It's just a linchpin. So that'll be a piece that takes to the next level. And I think it's environments like this that can help bring it together.
There's probably a role for you in this, too. I think two observations from being here at COP. There's just extraordinary innovation going on, and there is very little peripheral vision. Most of the industries I'm familiar with, they kind of know what each other are doing. Mm-hmm. We've met with 70-plus companies doing battery technology. They don't know what the other ones are doing. And each of them thinks they're doing something that's unique, and actually we meet two companies doing the same thing and using the same anode technology. And so the idea, we cannot waste an idea, we cannot waste a dollar, we have to find efficiency of information. And that peripheral vision problem can be addressed from things like COP and from the work you do, or your point about sharing information within the EU. Too many things are happening in silos today.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. No, yeah, 100%. And then it's how do you balance I love a system map, I do, but sometimes they get to look like spaghetti. So how do you balance, the complexity and kind of the actor mapping and everything that's going on, right? Like the thousands of folks that are here and all of the incredible work and projects and innovations themselves and initiatives, while also finding the simplicity. I think we were talking about that before as well. Like, how do you find the simplicity? We started a little bit in terms of, with so much going on, how do you prioritize and focus? So it's like beautiful balance and blend between the two. But you're absolutely right. I loved the efficiency of innovation, right? How do we ultimately just make sure that everything that we're doing has the kind of freedom and creativity, but also the kind of focus and, we are in the decisive decade. We do have a certain timeline that we're trying to work against. So how do we find the productivity of what we're trying to do too? Santosh, any reflections on this question of, efficiency, cross-pollination of learnings, sharing and receiving?
Yeah, coming from an energy company, we are perhaps on the supply side of energy. We are not directly working on the demand side. But that is the area that I look at when interacting with different people, different companies, different organizations. A lot is happening on the demand side also, like smart metering is coming up, where you can actually manage and forecast the demand. Then a lot of storage solutions are coming up. In addition to the battery, in the developing countries, a lot of companies are working on what you call is pump storage projects, which are essentially small hydro projects, where whenever you have surplus green energy because of its intermittency, you store the water at a gradient, and then when the demand picks up, you run the reversible turbines. So a lot of things are happening when you network and meet people and different companies, he was very correctly saying that it used to happen in silo, but many silos are now breaking up, and I believe that's the way to go ahead.
I think
Fantastic.
that's events like this bringing people together and the clarity of that goal. But at the same time, I think that having the incentives, having both the stick and the carrot can help move it faster. If I think about the carbon pricing and influence there.
Yeah, maybe one more point also on innovation beyond technologies. I think governance innovation is also super important. I was on a panel this morning with the presidential advisor of Romania. Romania has just established a new independent climate change committee. Romania is not exactly the front runner in terms of decarbonization in Europe. It's still very heavily coal dependent. And what they've done, rather than having the ministerial silos, is they've established a cross-ministerial commission directly under the president, which pulls together the different elements from all of the different ministries. The UK goes another step further. The UK has an independent climate change committee. So what they're doing is they're saying there's an independent committee that's holding the government responsible, and rather than micromanaging and saying you need to implement this or that measure, they're just checking every year the policies that are in place. Do they keep us on track for our own set targets? So I think this type of governance innovation is also hugely important, because ultimately, if we don't have democratic legitimization for pushing these measures forward and for using, quite frankly, quite a lot of taxpayers' money to doing so, we're not going in the right direction.
That's fantastic. And we're kind of talking, so I wanted to ask one last question and then open up for questions from the audience. So please think of your questions, and we'll make a whole line of you, and we'll just add them to the discussion, please. But yeah, my one last question is behavior change. And obviously that can be interpreted in a whole variety of ways, but ultimately we're kind of almost talking about the incentives, the nudges that need to happen, again, across the whole ecosystem. What is that? What reflections might you have in terms of the behavior change needed to enable the innovation we need to see? Anybody? Yeah.
I'll jump in. One of my big takeaways, and it wasn't something totally new, but it really resonated at COP this year, is the idea of bringing the humanity and the humanities into what we're doing. As a scientist, I know and I get and I run with numbers, and it's very analytical to me. But it's also very obvious as a human being that we're not getting to everybody, and we're not getting to people's hearts all the way. And so that was one of the reasons that we partnered with the Hot Poets to help bring forward the poem. But I think when it comes to pulling the demand, as you were saying, it has to be more than just the numbers. It has to be about something aspirational. And I'm personally a fan of carrots more than sticks. And so, like, I really love how, I'm going to go ahead and say that Tesla really transformed the EV market by allowing people to see that something could change in a brand new way, having electric vehicles shift from maybe what we saw originally as golf carts to something that, ooh, that could be fun and cool. Okay, I think that the same thing we saw, one of the areas we're way behind on is the type of diet we eat. Well, we make that choice multiple times a day. But if the food doesn't really taste good and seem fun and cool and have an aspirational piece to it, then you're less likely to choose a vegetarian diet. So I think, bringing forward those really fabulous tastes, and I know there's a ton of them, and making them more aspirational, I think that's a piece of it. I think there's a piece of reinventing and recognizing how our build environment gets smarter and more electrified. I think shifting more and more towards electrification, I'm actually really confident that you're going to get this there, because I see all the little pieces. It's not unlike the cell phone industry was back in the 2090 era. There were different pieces coming forward, and you could see it coming. I see it now with the electrification, but then we have to build the grids to get there. So I think those pieces are coming, and it's just, I wish you brought the slide, but we'll all read it in the report. I think those are the pieces. Make it aspirational. Make it something that everyone wants to do, and then you see the S-curve move.
Yeah, I think people in this ecosystem need to check themselves about how their attitudes and behaviors might change. Because we've now been successful in calling out the need and changing our language a little bit. I talked about from pessimism to optimism. The second thing would be talking about things not as problems, but as opportunities. I think I look at your slides and we need to increase. If you were able to increase, that would be a massive business opportunity, a massive capital opportunity. And people want to focus on opportunities, not just problems. And we become we're like the person who's been yelling about the problem so long that we forget to change that to the enticement of an opportunity. Last year was the first year that green energy spending passed fossil fuel spending. Like, that's a huge thing, right? We're moving forward. In the last decade, costs in solar came down 90% more than people expected. We've had to redraw the EV penetration curve 3 times in the last 5 years because it's happening faster. And by focusing on 2050 and how difficult that's going to be, we sort of miss the 2025 progress. So if we can begin to, one of my favorite quotes is from Scott Fitzgerald, which is one of the signs of intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in your mind and still function. And so I have 2 opposing ideas. One is we're not doing enough, and the other is we're doing a lot, and we have to make sure that we keep both those in our mind. And if we can offer opportunities, if we can, I'm with you, the EU uses sticks a lot. I like carrots. Like, we got to get more carrots out there to complement the sticks. And let's change a little bit of our dialogue about this. It's not that I'm Pollyannish about this, but I do think we may be surprised on the upside when we get to work.
Fantastic. Santosh, Johanna, anything to add?
I guess I would like to push a little bit against using sticks a lot. I think the EU also uses a lot of carrots. And I think ultimately what makes a working business model is a market structure that supports that business model, because you cannot subsidize uphill forever. So I think the IRA is fantastic, and it's a great piece of legislation. It's not possible for countries with less fiscal space than the US. So I think you need a smart balance of policy measures that use both regulation, but regulation in a way that emphasizes opportunity. So the carbon price is a massive opportunity for clean companies. It's not just a stick, it's an opportunity for those who innovate and to progress. And I think we should always keep both of those in mind and use both of those.
I agree, there's a place for both, but it's more fun when you look at the upside.
Absolutely. That's why I work for the Innovation Fund and not for the regulations.
Absolutely. But it is interesting, even in our own businesses, that we can compare, and even if we're not required to do them right away, that's an important piece of information. If we're looking at option 1 versus option 2, or for a single product, moving towards electrification, for example, in manufacturing, big deal, because that will allow a transition. If we're looking at one portfolio versus another, and one has a greener footprint than another, that can make it more attractive, because even though we can't say exactly how much the carbon is going to cost us in the future, we know it's not free. So I think that both are necessary. Always lean for carrots.
Fantastic. Any final remarks? Otherwise, I'm gonna turn it over to all the questions that are waiting for you in the audience.
No, on behavior change, it's already happening. Like, example of EV is a very classic example. When they came, people shifted from IC engines to EV. The experience was also better. Driving an EV and driving a IC car, a completely different experience. The kind of acceleration or torque you get, the quietness of the car. So that behavior change happens with the product also, and the kind of solution that one has to offer.
Yeah. That's exciting.
Just one other innovation point for all of you. An innovation to watch for is business model innovation. So what's really going to be great is when we don't need carrots or sticks. And in technology, you think about the PC business, the original business model was Wintel, which was personal computers, Intel chips, and Microsoft. And over here in the corner, there were these guys called Apple, and they had a different business model. Their business model was to deliver a system and a better product. And in the early days, one business model won, and in the later days, another did. And so what you're watching today in our world of climate is that the business models are beginning to evolve. And the question of who pays for these things in what way That's a really important innovation model, and we're beginning to see things happen there. And I think that bodes well, because if we need neither the carrot or the stick, it's going to happen.
It's just compelling from the heart, and I think that's a big reason that Apple won too, is the fonts, the design of the product itself. Really, they made it personal, and that's compelling.
Speaking of compelling, I'm sure there are compelling questions waiting for you, burning for you. So I'd love to get some of those.
Okay. So I am an observer from the faith contingent, and so I particularly appreciated your comment on bringing the humanity and human side into the picture and how much more prevalent that is. That may not be what you intended, but it's what I received, so. Okay, so I did not know who would be on this panel, and my burning question is, where are flow batteries and that technology? And that is not particularly, or perhaps you do have some experience or knowledge of that. Sounds like you might, Jim. But short of that question, if you don't have knowledge of that, can you share what's happening with microgrids and storage within your own communities, and where is that going? Because at this COP, and this is my 5th COP, I'm hearing nothing about storage.
You want to start with flow batteries, or should we jump to Santosh about grids? Okay. Okay.
As an energy company, we focus on grid storage. And as of now, we have found that batteries are not competitive, or they change the affordability of energy or electricity once you have storage, grid level storage on battery. Rather than battery, what we are doing is the pump storage is another way of storing that energy, the renewable energy, where you get almost 83% of the energy back into the grid. So that's the kind of loss you have in running a pump and then a turbine. And the kind of storage cost that it adds to the grid is hardly about 3.5 cents. So that's one solution that we are also working on. We have almost 20 gigawatt of pump storage under planning. And the first one will be operational in another 8 months' time. So batteries definitely, as on today, we're not working on.
I can talk a little bit about, and now I'm going extreme with microgrid, and this is not necessarily even specific to 3M. But one of the things that I think is really exciting is as we're seeing that transition happen, and this gives you the examples that Rachel was talking about earlier about how different pieces come together, is that with the rise of electric vehicles, whether it's because someday, but not well before 2050, those electric vehicles will come end of life. There are also, opportunities of different types of electrification that's being done. There's an opportunity to downcycle that. And what you see in some cases is the increasing rise in home battery storage. So you can have that, it can be pulled from your vehicle in terms of the electricity, or an end-of-life electric vehicle battery can be used as battery storage to amend renewable energy at your home, be it wind or solar. So I think there's those pieces as well. I think what's really exciting in the space is seeing how the different elements come together. I mean, what I heard you say, Santosh, earlier is that you weren't really worried about storage anymore. And to your point, I felt like the last few COPs, there was so much comment and so much discussion that storage was so critical, such an absolutely critical issue. I think that we're finding different ways to solve it, maybe not exactly as we thought it was before, because that ecosystem is coming together.
The storage is absolutely central.
Okay.
And it's happening but it's happening everywhere. So it's a little bit like when software is key to technology, but sometimes we just talk about technology and you understand that we're talking about storage. So one of the evolutions I think that's happened is what you touched on, which is the fact that we're not talking about it, that we sort of internalized that it's key is probably a sign of progress. But storage remains one of the great battlefields. So we have the largest solar storage project in California. We have a company called Form Electric, which is doing grid-scale batteries. We're doing storage projects around the world. So storage has just become absolutely key to the whole question. But there's still, as you point out, is it pump storage? Is it there's so many different kinds of storage, just like there's so many different kinds of software. But if we're not talking about it, it doesn't mean that it's not absolutely critical in its centricity.
What I see, there's going to continue to be a lot of different types of storage for some time. There's places for, it's not going to be one answer.
Yeah, there's this idea there's no silver bullet. It's silver buckshot. You know, there's storage is absolutely key, but it's going to be delivered in 20 different ways and optimized in each situation. Yeah, well, pumped hydro, right? Yeah, but that's got other problems, right? So yeah, no, I agree. There's several technologies, all of which have different problems, and we have to, like, I'm really big on battery recycling because we should never, you know, one way to not have to extract is to reuse, and so we have to set up that ecosystem. But I wish if we can find the most efficient storage vehicles in the least impactful footprint, you know, we're all in.
With that, we're out of time, but go ahead, Johanna, would you like a last word?
Very quick. I also feel like we're in a much better place for short duration storage. I think long duration storage and seasonal storage remains a huge issue. In Europe, we now have the first countries that hit 60% renewable penetration, 70% with Ireland. So there you really go into the problem of seasonal storage. And I think redox flow batteries, sort of hot materials type of medium to long duration storage will be super important, and then we're getting into the space of hydrogen, which can then be a very long duration seasonal storage medium.
Yeah, hydrogen is just a battery.
Well, and the beautiful thing that just happened, everybody, is that we just went really deep on one example, and then if you think back to like that one slide of all of the systems, think of all the innovation that needs to happen. And actually, what we just discussed was already across a few of those systems and sectors. Anyway, so just to say huge thank you to this panel for such a broad-ranging discussion. We could literally have a whole another hour on storage in and of itself, and I'm sure many of the other topics that are bubbling up for you now. But just a huge thank you to the panel. For all of the incredible experience and kind of perspectives that you bring to this topic, and looking forward to continuing the discussion in the rest of the time we have here at COP. Thanks, everybody.